It is huge, to live under the light of someone as big as Elvis. It's a big responsibility.
Riley Keough just dropped the bombshell that nobody saw coming. And it's about to tear apart everything you thought you knew about the Presley family dynasty. In a devastating new Vanity Fair interview, Elvis's granddaughter finally broke her silence about the explosive family war that erupted after her mother, Lisa Marie Presley's death. And what she revealed will make your blood boil. If your mother dies unexpectedly, you're grieving, trying to hold your family together, and then your own grandmother, the woman who's supposed to love and protect you, stabs you in the back by challenging your rightful inheritance in court. That's exactly what happened to Riley Keough, and she's done staying quiet about it. Lisa Marie Presley died in January at just 54 years old from bowel obstruction complications. But here's what the media didn't tell you. Her death sent the Presley family into absolute chaos. Riley describes it perfectly. Our heart is broken. Everyone was in a bit of a panic to understand how we move forward. But panic about what exactly? The grief? The loss? No, they were panicking about money, about power, about who would control the massive Presley empire. See, there's a huge business side to the Presley family that most people don't understand. We're not just talking about some family photos and sentimental jewelry here. We're talking about Graceland, the most famous home in America. We're talking about Elvis's entire legacy, his image rights, his estate, millions upon millions of dollars in assets and ongoing revenue streams. And Lisa Marie had made her wishes crystal clear. She wanted Riley to take over everything: her estate, the business aspects, the whole empire. Riley was named the sole trustee, and legally, that should have been the end of it. A grieving daughter honoring her mother's final wishes while the family comes together to heal. But Priscilla Presley had other plans. While Riley was trying to process her mother's death, while she was dealing with the devastating loss of the woman who gave her life, Priscilla was already plotting her next move. And what she did next is so calculated, so cold-blooded, that it'll make you question everything you thought you knew about Elvis's widow. Priscilla contested the authenticity and validity of Riley's appointment. She basically accused her own granddaughter of fraud. Think about that for a second. Your grandmother, in your darkest hour, decides to drag you through court and publicly question whether you forged legal documents. The woman who should be supporting you instead becomes your biggest enemy. Riley explains the nightmare that followed. It took a minute to understand the details of the situation because it's complicated. Complicated? That's putting it mildly. What Riley's really saying is that while she was mourning her mother, she had to fight tooth and nail just to honor Lisa Marie's dying wishes. But here's where it gets really twisted. Priscilla didn't just challenge Riley in private family meetings. She made this a public spectacle. Court documents, legal battles, media coverage. She turned her granddaughter's grief into a circus. And why? Because as Riley puts it, there's a huge business side to their family, and Priscilla wanted her piece of the pie. The woman who spent decades positioning herself as the keeper of Elvis's legacy, the devoted widow protecting his memory, showed her true colors the moment real money was on the line. She was willing to destroy her own family to get control of the Presley empire. And the most infuriating part? Priscilla tried to spin this whole thing like she was the victim, like she was just looking out for the family's best interests. But Riley saw right through it. The court saw right through it too. Last week, Riley won the legal battle. Completely. The court recognized what Lisa Marie wanted, and they gave Riley exactly what her mother intended: full control of the estate and all business aspects. Justice was served, but the damage to the family was already done. Because here's what Priscilla didn't count on. Riley isn't the naive young woman she thought she could manipulate. Riley is level-headed, she's smart, and she's much further advanced than anyone gave her credit for. When push came to shove, She didn't just defend herself. She completely dismantled her grandmother's case. Now Riley owns it all. Graceland, the legacy, the business empire. It's all hers. And Priscilla? She's left scrambling to repair a relationship she destroyed through her own greed and desperation. But what Riley said next about her grandmother's true motives will leave you speechless. The gloves came off when Priscilla made her move, and Riley's response was absolutely savage. When Priscilla contested Riley's appointment as trustee, she wasn't just questioning some paperwork. She was essentially calling her own granddaughter a liar and a fraud in front of the entire world. The legal challenge centered around the authenticity and validity of Riley's role, which is lawyer speak for, "We think you're making this up." But here's the thing that makes this betrayal even more disgusting: the timing. Lisa Marie had just died. Riley was dealing with the most devastating loss of her life. And instead of getting support from her grandmother, she got served with legal papers. Instead of a shoulder to cry on, she got accusations and court dates. Riley's own words paint the picture of absolute chaos. Everyone was in a bit of a panic to understand how we move forward. But that panic wasn't just about grief. It was about survival. Because when you're part of the Presley dynasty, grief is a luxury you can't afford when there are vultures circling your inheritance. And make no mistake, Priscilla was the biggest vulture of all. See, what most people don't understand is the psychological warfare that was happening behind the scenes. This wasn't just about money. This was about legacy, about power, about who gets to control the Elvis empire for the next generation. Priscilla has spent her entire adult life being Elvis's widow. That's her identity, her claim to fame, her source of income and influence. But now, Riley was being handed the keys to the kingdom, and Priscilla couldn't stand it. The legal dispute that followed was brutal. Court documents flying back and forth, lawyers making millions while the family imploded, and through it all, Riley had to prove that her own mother's wishes were legitimate. Think about how insane that is. Having to legally prove that your dead mother actually wanted you to inherit her estate. But here's where Riley showed just how steel-spined she really is. Instead of crumbling under the pressure, instead of giving in to keep the peace, she fought back with everything she had. She didn't just defend herself, she went on the offensive. Because Riley understood something that Priscilla clearly didn't. This wasn't just about honoring Lisa Marie's wishes. This was about protecting the entire Presley legacy from someone who was willing to tear the family apart for personal gain. And the court proceedings revealed just how desperate Priscilla had become. Here's a woman who's lived her entire life in the shadow of Elvis, who's built her whole identity around being his widow. And she was watching that power slip away to the next generation. So she did what desperate people do. She lashed out at the person closest to her. The psychological pressure on Riley during this time must have been unimaginable. She's dealing with grief. She's trying to understand complex business arrangements. She's managing a media circus. And she's fighting her own grandmother in court. As Riley puts it, living under the light of someone as big as Elvis is already a big responsibility. Now imagine doing that while your family is actively trying to destroy you. But Riley had something Priscilla didn't count on: the truth. Lisa Marie's intentions were clear. The legal documents were legitimate, and Riley's appointment was rock solid. When push came to shove, the court sided with Lisa Marie's wishes, not Priscilla's desperate power grab. The moment Riley won that legal battle was the moment she transformed from grieving granddaughter into the undisputed head of the Presley empire. She didn't just inherit money and property, she inherited the power to make decisions about Elvis's legacy, about Graceland, about everything that matters to the Presley name.
And Priscilla?
She was left with nothing but damaged relationships and a reputation in tatters. But here's the most savage part of Riley's victory. She didn't gloat. She didn't throw it in Priscilla's face. Instead, she delivered the most devastating blow possible. She told the truth. Riley's response to winning was simple. Clarity has been had. Translation: the games are over, the truth is out, and I'm in charge now. She even had the grace to say that things with her grandmother will be happy and that they've never not been happy. But don't mistake that for weakness. That's power move psychology 101. When you've completely destroyed your opponent, you can afford to be gracious about it. Because Riley understood what this fight was really about, and it had nothing to do with protecting the family legacy. The most twisted part of this family feud? It's literally about where dead bodies get buried. While the world was focused on the money and the estate drama, there was an even more disturbing battle happening behind the scenes. Priscilla wasn't just fighting for control of Elvis's business empire. She was fighting for the right to be buried next to him. And she was willing to use that as leverage against her own granddaughter. Let me paint you the picture of just how sick this gets. Graceland has a meditation garden where the Presley family is laid to rest. Elvis is buried there between his grandmother and his father. Lisa Marie is buried there. Riley's brother Benjamin, who tragically died by suicide in 2020 at just 27 years old, is also buried in that sacred space. It's supposed to be a place of peace, of eternal rest, of family unity even in death. But Priscilla turned it into a bargaining chip. According to reports, Priscilla's future burial site had become a major point of contention in the legal negotiations. She specifically requested to be buried next to Elvis, her ex-husband, remember, not even her current husband. And she was using this demand as part of her legal strategy against Riley. Think about the psychological manipulation at work here. Priscilla was essentially saying, "Give me control of the estate, or I'll make your family's final resting place a battleground forever." She was holding the sanctity of Elvis's grave hostage to get what she wanted. The legal documents that came out of this mess are absolutely chilling. They state that Riley will, to the extent of her authority, allow Priscilla to be buried in the garden, and that Priscilla's burial location will be at the location closest to Elvis Presley without moving any existing gravesite. Read between the lines there. Riley had to legally guarantee her grandmother a gravesite just to end this nightmare. She had to put in writing that yes, when you die, we'll bury you near Elvis. Can you imagine having to negotiate your grandmother's burial arrangements while she's actively trying to destroy you in court?
But here's where Riley's true character shines through, and it's devastating. When asked about the burial controversy, her response was ice cold. "I don't know why she wouldn't be buried at Graceland if she wants to be. Of course." Of course. Two words that absolutely destroyed Priscilla's entire narrative. Because what Riley's really saying is, "I never would have stopped you from being buried there. This was never about the gravesite. You created this drama. You turned our family's resting place into a legal weapon. And for what?" The beautiful irony is that Riley revealed something that makes Priscilla look even worse. Sharing Graceland with the world, opening it up as a tourist destination. That was Priscilla's idea from the start. She's the one who commercialized Elvis's memory, who turned his home into a business, and now she was fighting her own granddaughter over where she'd be buried in the empire she helped create. But the deeper psychology here is what's really disturbing. Priscilla's desperation to be buried next to Elvis reveals everything about her motivations. She's not just Elvis's widow. She's a woman who's built her entire identity around a man who died almost 50 years ago. And she was so terrified of losing that connection, so afraid of being forgotten, that she was willing to traumatize her own family to secure her place in Elvis history. The meditation garden represents something sacred, family, legacy, eternal peace, but Priscilla weaponized it. She turned the final resting place of Riley's mother, brother, and great-grandfather into a legal negotiation point. She made Riley fight for the right to protect her own family's graves.
And the most twisted part? Even after all this, Riley still granted her request. Even after the betrayal, the court battles, the psychological warfare, Riley still said yes to letting Priscilla be buried near Elvis. That's not weakness. That's the ultimate power move. Because Riley understood that this burial dispute exposed the true nature of their relationship and what this whole fight was really about. Riley didn't just win the legal battle. She delivered a masterclass in family destruction. Here's the thing that makes Riley's victory so devastating. She didn't just beat Priscilla in court. She exposed her grandmother's true nature to the entire world, and she did it with surgical precision. When Riley finally broke her silence in that Vanity Fair interview, every single word was calculated to destroy Priscilla's carefully crafted public image. Riley's statement that anything that would suggest otherwise in the press makes me sad because at the end of the day, all she wants is to love and protect Graceland and the Presley family, and the legacy sounds supportive on the surface. But it's actually the most savage takedown you've ever heard. What Riley's really saying is, my grandmother created this entire mess, dragged our family through hell, traumatized me during my grief, and now she's trying to rewrite history by claiming she was protecting us all along. That's psychological warfare at its finest. Because Riley understood something crucial that Priscilla didn't. In the modern world, public perception is everything. Priscilla had been playing the victim card, trying to convince the media that there was no family rift, that everything was fine, that she was just looking out for everyone's best interests. But Riley's response completely destroyed that narrative. She didn't attack Priscilla directly. She didn't need to. She just told the truth, and the truth was damning enough. Riley revealed that the whole legal battle happened because everyone was in a bit of a panic after Lisa Marie's death. She exposed how Priscilla contested the estate documents. She showed the world exactly what kind of person fights their own grieving granddaughter in court over money and power. And then, in the most devastating move of all, Riley showed grace. She said things with her grandmother will be happy, and that they've never not been happy. But that grace wasn't weakness. It was the ultimate display of power. Because when you've completely destroyed someone, when you've exposed their true nature and won everything they were fighting for, you can afford to be magnanimous. Riley's gracious response wasn't forgiveness. It was a victory lap. The transformation Riley underwent during this battle is absolutely stunning. She went from being a grief-stricken daughter who just wanted to honor her mother's wishes to becoming the undisputed empress of the Presley dynasty. She didn't just inherit Graceland. She inherited the power to shape Elvis's legacy for generations to come. And what does this victory really mean? Riley now controls everything. She owns Graceland, she makes the business decisions, she determines how Elvis's image and legacy are used. Every movie deal, every licensing agreement, every decision about what happens to the most famous home in America, it all goes through Riley now. Priscilla spent decades positioning herself as the keeper of Elvis's flame, the protector of his memory. But her own greed and desperation cost her everything. She's now just another family member with no real power, no control, and a reputation permanently damaged by her own actions. The devastating irony is that Priscilla created the very rift she spent months denying existed. She turned a family tragedy into a public spectacle. She transformed her granddaughter's grief into a legal battlefield. And in the end, she got exactly what she deserved. Nothing. But Riley's ultimate power move wasn't winning the legal battle. It wasn't getting control of the estate. It wasn't even exposing Priscilla's true nature to the world. Riley's ultimate power move was showing everyone that she's not just Elvis's granddaughter or Lisa Marie's daughter. She's her own person, with her own strength, her own intelligence, and her own ruthless ability to protect what matters to her. She proved that she's not the naive young woman that Priscilla thought she could manipulate. She's the rightful heir to the Presley throne, and she's more than capable of defending it against anyone, even her own family. Priscilla gambled everything on a power grab and lost it all. Riley didn't just win, she became the undisputed queen of the Presley empire. And that transformation from victim to victor is the most shocking twist in this entire saga. What do you think? Was Riley protecting her mother's wishes? Or did she go too far in this family war? Drop your thoughts below. And if you want more explosive celebrity family drama, hit that subscribe button, because we're just getting started with the stories Hollywood doesn't want you to know.
We were together way before that. I was with him when I was, 16, 17, 18, 19, and then we married at 21 and on. The things that Elvis did, first of all, when he was young, he never liked to go to people's homes or eat because he didn't like eating with others.
It's a quiet Tuesday morning in 2023, and Priscilla Presley is doing something she's avoided for decades. She's alone in the attic of Graceland, surrounded by boxes of Elvis's personal belongings that haven't been touched since he died 46 years ago. This isn't some sentimental journey down memory lane. Priscilla's here on business. There's an estate matter that requires her to go through Elvis's things, and she's been putting it off for months. But today, she finally forced herself to climb those stairs and face whatever memories were waiting for her up there. The attic smells like old leather and dust. Every box she opens is like a time machine, stage costumes that still smell like his cologne, handwritten song lyrics scribbled on napkins, photographs from their happiest days together. She's been at this for hours, methodically sorting through a lifetime of memories, when she spots something that stops her cold.
Elvis's favorite guitar case. The black leather one he took on every tour, the one that was always by his side in those final years. Priscilla remembers this case sitting in his bedroom at Graceland, remembers how he'd grab it whenever he was restless or couldn't sleep. She opens the case, expecting to find the guitar, maybe some old pics or sheet music. Instead, there's an envelope wedged into the side pocket, a pocket she never knew existed. The envelope is cream-colored, expensive paper, the kind Elvis used for important correspondence. And written across the front, in Elvis's unmistakable handwriting, are 5 words that make her hands start shaking. "For my true love, never sent." Priscilla stares at those words for a long moment. Her true love? In 1977, when this was clearly written, they were divorced. She was with Mike Stone. Elvis was with Ginger Alden. Who could this letter possibly be for? But even as she asks herself that question, she already knows the answer. Deep down, in that place where you keep the truths you're not ready to face, she knows this letter is for her. The envelope is sealed, never opened. The postmark shows it was prepared for mailing in July 1977, just 3 weeks before Elvis died. 3 weeks before everything ended forever. Priscilla's heart is pounding now. She's holding something that was meant to be sent but never was. A final message from the man who was the love of her life, the father of her child, the person who understood her better than anyone ever had or ever would. But why didn't he send it? She turns the envelope over in her hands, and that's when she notices something else. There's a small notation in the corner, written in different ink, like it was added later. "Courage failed me again. Maybe tomorrow. E."
Elvis had written this letter, sealed it, prepared it for mailing, and then lost his nerve. And then he died, 3 days before Priscilla's next scheduled visit to Graceland. 3 days. Priscilla sinks into an old chair that's covered in dusty sheets. She's been divorced from Elvis for longer than she was married to him. She's built a whole life without him, created her own identity, her own success. She's told herself for decades that their marriage ending was for the best, that they both found happiness apart. But holding this letter, she realizes she's about to learn something that could change everything. This isn't just a piece of mail that got lost in the shuffle. This is Elvis's final attempt to reach her, to tell her something so important he couldn't say it while he was alive. What could Elvis Presley, a man who never held back his feelings, a man who wore his heart on his sleeve for the whole world to see, what could he have needed to tell her that was so difficult he couldn't find the courage to send it? The letter feels heavier in her hands than it should. It's just paper and ink. But Priscilla knows she's holding something that has the power to rewrite history. Not just her history with Elvis, but the story the whole world believes about their relationship, their divorce, and his final years. She looks around the attic, at all these boxes of memories, and realizes that for 46 years, she's been living with an incomplete picture. Elvis took secrets with him to the grave, and now she's holding one of them. The question is, does she have the courage to read what Elvis couldn't find the courage to send? Her hands are still shaking as she carefully opens the envelope and begins to unfold what might be the most important letter of her life. Priscilla unfolds the letter with trembling hands, and immediately she recognizes Elvis's handwriting. Not the careful signature he used for autographs, but his real writing, the messy scrawl he used when he was pouring his heart out. The letter is 4 pages long, and it starts with 2 words that nearly break her. My Scylla. Nobody called her that except Elvis. It was his private name for her, the name he whispered when they were alone, when the whole world disappeared and it was just the 2 of them. She hasn't heard that name in decades, and seeing it written in his handwriting brings back a flood of memories she thought she'd buried. My Scylla, I've started this letter 100 times and never had the guts to finish it. But I'm dying inside, baby. And I need you to know the truth before it's too late. Priscilla's breath catches. Before it's too late? This was written just 3 weeks before he died. Did Elvis somehow know his time was running out?
I know what you're thinking. Here goes Elvis being dramatic again. But this isn't drama, honey. This is me finally being honest about the biggest mistake I ever made. I let you go. I let the best thing that ever happened to me walk out that door. And I've been paying for it every single day since. The letter goes on, and with each word, Priscilla feels like she's being transported back in time. Elvis writes about their divorce, but not the way they told the story to the press. Not the clean, amicable separation they both claimed it was. You want to know why I had all those affairs? Why I couldn't stay faithful to the most beautiful, loving woman in the world? It wasn't because I didn't love you enough, Scylla. It was because I loved you too much, and I hated myself for not being good enough for you. This isn't the narrative Priscilla has lived with for years. She'd convinced herself that Elvis cheated because he got bored, because he needed constant validation, because that's just who he was. But reading his words now, she's learning something that changes everything. Every time I looked at you, I saw this perfect woman who deserved better than a man who lived his life in the spotlight, who couldn't give you a normal life, who was always gone, always performing, always belonging to everyone except the person who mattered most. So I sabotaged it. I pushed you away before you could figure out you deserved better and leave me anyway. Elvis writes about the other women, and his words are devastating in their honesty. Linda, Ginger, all of them. They were just me trying to find pieces of you in someone else. Every brunette I dated, every woman who laughed like you, or moved like you, or reminded me even a little bit of what we had. But it was like trying to build a masterpiece with broken pieces of other paintings. It never worked, because there's only one you. Then comes the part that absolutely destroys her. Elvis writes about their daughter, about watching Lisa Marie grow up and seeing Priscilla's eyes in their little girl's face. Every time Lisa comes to visit, she asks me the same question. Daddy, why can't Mommy come home? And I never know what to say, because the truth is too complicated for a little girl to understand. The truth is that Daddy ruined the best thing in his life because he was scared and stupid and didn't think he deserved to be happy. But then Elvis drops a bombshell that makes Priscilla's world tilt on its axis. Scylla, I need you to know something. I've been getting help. Real help. I've been working with doctors. Not just the ones who tell me what I want to hear, but the ones who tell me what I need to hear. I've been trying to get clean, trying to get my life back together. Because I want to ask you something when I see you next week.
Next week.
He was planning to tell her this in person. I want to ask you to marry me again. I know that sounds crazy. I know we're divorced. I know you've moved on. I know I have no right to ask. But I also know that what we had was real. And I don't think either of us has ever found anything like it since. The letter reveals that Elvis had been planning this conversation for months. He'd been secretly working to get his life together, not for his career or his fans, but for her, for the chance to win back the woman he never stopped loving. I'm not asking you to answer me now. I'm not even asking you to forgive me. I'm just asking for a chance to show you that I can be the man you married, the man you fell in love with, the man who loves you more than his own life. The letter ends with words that break Priscilla's heart completely. I'll be waiting for you next week, baby. I'll be waiting for you forever if I have to. All my love, always and forever, Elvis. He died 3 days before she arrived for that visit. 3 days before he could tell her face to face that he wanted to spend the rest of his life making up for the mistake of letting her go. Priscilla realizes she's crying, tears falling onto Elvis's handwritten words. And for the first time in 46 years, she's seeing their story completely differently. But Elvis's letter doesn't end with his confession of love. There's more, and it's about to reveal a conspiracy that Priscilla never saw coming. As she continues reading through her tears, Elvis starts naming names. Real names of people who were supposedly looking out for both of them. People she trusted. People who claimed they wanted what was best for their family. Scylla, I need you to know that I've tried to reach out before. Not publicly, not through lawyers, but personally. Remember when you heard I was asking Red about how you were doing? Remember when Charlie called you last Christmas and said I'd been thinking about you? Those weren't casual conversations, baby. I was trying to find a way back to you. Priscilla's mind races. She does remember those moments. Red West, mentioning Elvis had asked about her. Charlie Hodges' seemingly innocent phone calls. At the time, she'd dismissed them as Elvis just being polite, checking in on his ex-wife through mutual friends. She never imagined there was something deeper happening. But then, Elvis drops a bombshell that makes her sick to her stomach. What you don't know is that every time I tried to make a real move, every time I got up the courage to call you directly or come see you, someone talked me out of it. And I'm ashamed to say, I let them. Elvis writes about Colonel Parker pulling him aside after he'd worked up the nerve to call Priscilla directly. The colonel told him it would be career suicide to pursue his ex-wife publicly, that the fate...
But that wasn't the worst part, Scylla. The worst part was when the colonel told me you'd moved on completely. He said his people had been keeping tabs, and you were happy with Mike Stone. He said you'd told someone, he wouldn't say who, that going back to Elvis would be the biggest mistake of your life. Priscilla's blood runs cold. She never said those words. She never even thought them. Yes, she was with Mike Stone, but happy? She'd been trying to build a new life, trying to convince herself she could love someone else the way she'd loved Elvis. But she'd never said anything about it being a mistake to go back. Someone had been lying to Elvis. Someone had been feeding him false information to keep him away from her. The letter reveals more devastating details. Elvis writes about how his behavior in those final months wasn't just about drugs or depression. It was about fighting a war inside himself, between wanting to reach out to her and believing he'd lost her forever. Every erratic thing I did, every time I seemed to lose it on stage or in interviews, it was because I was carrying this weight. I wanted to fight for you, but everyone around me kept telling me it was hopeless, that I'd already lost you, that trying to win you back would just embarrass us both. Then Elvis mentions something that makes Priscilla's hands shake all over again. Joe told me about the time you called Graceland last spring, asking if Lisa Marie could stay an extra week. He said you sounded lonely, like maybe you wanted to talk. I wanted to get on that phone so bad, Scylla. I wanted to tell you to come home. But Vernon was standing right there, shaking his head, reminding me about what the colonel said. So I let Joe handle it, and I spent the next 3 days kicking myself for being a coward. Priscilla remembers that phone call. She had wanted to talk to Elvis. She'd been going through a rough patch with Mike, questioning everything about her new life. And hearing Lisa Marie's stories about her daddy made her miss him terribly. When Joe answered instead of Elvis, she'd been disappointed. But she assumed Elvis was busy or didn't want to talk to her. He was there. He wanted to talk to her. But his own father and manager convinced him not to. The most heartbreaking revelation comes near the end of the letter. Elvis writes about Lisa Marie, about conversations with their daughter that no one else knew about. Lisa Marie asked me last month if I still love her mommy, and when I told her yes, she said something that broke my heart. She said, "Then why don't you tell her, Daddy? Mommy cries sometimes when she thinks I'm not looking." Baby, is that true? Do you still think about us?
Priscilla sinks into the chair by Elvis's bed, still holding the ring, and 46 years of carefully constructed walls come crashing down. All this time, she told herself their divorce was inevitable, that they'd grown apart, that Elvis had moved on, and so had she. But that was all a lie she told herself to survive the pain. The truth is, she never stopped loving him. The truth is, every relationship since Elvis has been measured against what they had, and nothing ever came close. The truth is, she spent decades wondering what if, and now she has her answer. They could have made it work. If Colonel Parker hadn't manipulated them, if Vernon hadn't discouraged Elvis, if the people around them hadn't been so invested in keeping them apart, they might have found their way back to each other. More devastating than that, Elvis died believing she didn't want him anymore. He died thinking she'd moved on completely, that asking her to remarry him would be embarrassing for both of them. He never knew that she was struggling too, that she was questioning her choices, that part of her was waiting for him to fight for them. The letter forces Priscilla to confront a horrible truth. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, died of a broken heart. Not just from the drugs or the lifestyle, but from believing he'd lost the love of his life forever, when the truth was, she was still within reach. For decades, Priscilla has protected Elvis's legacy, protected their story, protected the myth that their love was beautiful, but not meant to last. But this letter changes everything. It reveals that their greatest tragedy wasn't that they couldn't make it work. It's that they never got the chance to try again. Sitting in Elvis's bedroom, holding the engagement ring he never got to give her, Priscilla realizes she has a choice to make. She can put the ring back, seal the letter away, and let the world continue believing the story they've always known. Or she can tell the truth about what really happened, even if it means admitting that the greatest love story in rock and roll history was destroyed by the very people who were supposed to protect it. Have you ever lost someone because others convinced you it was hopeless? Sometimes the greatest tragedies happen when love is within reach, but pride keeps us apart. What would you have done with Elvis's letter? Share your thoughts below and subscribe for more shocking celebrity secrets that challenge everything we thought we knew.
This church is not running some kind of scam or scheme to make money, to get a following, to make people believe that I'm somebody that I'm not.
Bob Joyce never planned to say this out loud. Not in public, not to an audience, and certainly not on a day like this. For decades, he carried the story in silence, guarding it the way a man guards something too heavy to put down, but too sacred to let go. But when he finally opened his mouth and spoke the first sentence, it was clear. This wasn't a rumor, this wasn't a myth, and it wasn't a headline chasing attention. This was a confession born from pain, loyalty, and years of knowing the truth behind Elvis Presley's last tour. Bob said he stayed quiet because he didn't want to cause trouble, especially not for the Presley family. He didn't want fans twisting his words into conspiracy theories or gossip. He didn't want the world to turn Elvis's final struggle into entertainment. But time has a way of changing people. And the older Bob grew, the more he felt something, a pulling inside him, insisting that the story had to be told, at least once, before he left this world too. He began by admitting something simple but powerful. I didn't know the truth at first. I only knew the sound. That sound was Elvis's voice. The voice everyone knew as strong, golden, larger than life. But this time it wasn't coming from a stage. It wasn't echoing through speakers or floating over screaming crowds. It was a voice cracking behind a curtain, trembling with exhaustion. Bob remembered the moment clearly. It was during the last tour, and he was close enough to hear Elvis warming up. The king wasn't singing, not the way fans imagined. He was struggling through deep breaths, forcing out lines, pausing between notes. There was a heaviness, a pain, something deeper than fatigue. Bob said it was the first moment he realized that Elvis wasn't simply tired. He was breaking. What shook Bob wasn't the weakness in Elvis's voice. It was the way Elvis tried to hide it, as if he didn't want anyone, not even his closest people, to see what was happening. It was the sound of a man fighting his own body and losing. Bob's tone deepened when he explained why he never spoke of it. He said he respected Elvis too much. He knew how much Elvis valued dignity, even when the world didn't offer him any. Speaking about that moment felt like exposing a wound that wasn't his to reveal. But now, years later, Bob felt a different responsibility rising inside him. The responsibility to tell the truth about who Elvis really was during those final nights. A man who gave everything, even when he barely had anything left. Then Bob said something that changed the entire tone of his confession. Elvis's last tour, he whispered, wasn't supposed to happen. He didn't mean that in a dramatic way. He meant it literally. There were conversations, quiet, painful conversations, between Elvis and the handful of people he trusted most. In those conversations, Elvis admitted that he wasn't ready, that his health was slipping fast, that he felt weaker, sicker, more unstable than ever before. Someone close to him had begged him to stop, begged him to rest, begged him to save himself. Elvis listened, but only for a moment. Because Elvis wasn't just a man. He carried a name, an empire, a machine built on decades of expectation. Stopping wasn't simple. Walking away wasn't easy. And saying no wasn't something Elvis had ever been allowed to do. Bob said that Elvis looked trapped by contracts, by pressure, by the fear of letting people down. He didn't want to disappoint fans. He didn't want to look weak. And somewhere in his heart, maybe he still hoped he had one more tour left in him. One more spark. One more night where the world would remember him not for his pain, but for his power. But Bob knew there was more to the story. He said the final tour didn't begin with excitement. It began with warnings. Warnings the world ignored. And then Bob revealed the part he almost refused to share. Just hours before one of the last shows, something happened backstage. Something so emotional, so revealing, that Bob said it changed everything he believed about Elvis's final days. A moment no one outside that room ever heard about. A moment that would rewrite what we thought we knew about the King's last journey. Bob paused, eyes heavy, voice low. That was the moment, he said quietly, when I realized Elvis knew the end was closer than anyone wanted to admit. And what happened in that room is where the real story begins. Bob Joyce didn't rush into the next part of his story. He eased into it the way a man does when he's remembering something painful. Something that never leaves him, no matter how many years pass. He said that if people truly want to understand Elvis's final tour, they have to step behind the stage lights. They have to see what Elvis looked like when the crowd wasn't calling his name, when the cameras weren't rolling, when the world wasn't expecting a miracle from a man who barely had the strength to stand. Bob explained that backstage on that tour felt nothing like the glamorous world fans imagined. It felt quiet, tense, and strangely hollow. The air always seemed heavy, carrying a silence that didn't match the excitement outside the doors. Elvis wasn't surrounded by celebration. He was surrounded by worry, by whispers, by people who didn't know how to help, some who didn't even try. And it was in one of those backstage rooms that Bob saw the truth. The King wasn't just tired. He was collapsing piece by piece. He remembered one night in particular. Elvis had just arrived at the venue, and everything seemed off. Elvis wasn't joking the way he used to. He wasn't doing his usual pre-show rituals. He wasn't even humming. He walked in slowly, shoulders hunched, breathing heavier than normal, his face pale with exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that comes from deep inside the bones, not just from a long day. Bob said Elvis sat down in a chair, but it wasn't the casual kind of sit people do when they're relaxing. It was the kind of sit that looks like a man lowering himself into a fight he can't avoid. Elvis leaned forward, elbows on his knees, head in his hands, trying to gather enough strength to do the one thing he had done thousands of times before. Walk out there and give everything he had. That's when the door closed, leaving only Elvis, a close friend, and Bob within earshot. Bob swore he didn't mean to listen, but Elvis was speaking softly, and the words floated through the crack in the door, words he could never unhear. Elvis said he felt like he was slipping away. He said his chest felt tight, his breathing felt strange, and his hands wouldn't stop trembling. He said he didn't feel like himself anymore. And then he whispered something that broke Bob's heart. "Sometimes I think I won't make it through another show." His friend tried to reassure him, telling him it was just exhaustion, that he'd feel better once the adrenaline kicked in. But Bob said Elvis didn't believe that anymore. He wasn't complaining. He wasn't being dramatic. He was confessing. He was scared. And that was something Elvis never said lightly. During the final weeks of the tour, Elvis's behavior changed. Not in a dramatic, explosive way, but in the small details. The kind of changes only someone who genuinely cared would notice. Elvis began sitting alone more often. He stayed silent longer. He stared at his hands as if trying to understand why they shook. Sometimes he'd pause mid-sentence, as if his thoughts were slipping away from him. Bob described one of the hardest moments to hear. Elvis had tried to lift himself from a chair he had never struggled with before. But this time, he couldn't. His arms trembled, his legs gave out. He had to wait, just to gather the strength to stand. That was the moment, Bob said, when the truth finally stabbed through the denial surrounding Elvis. "He's dying right in front of us," Bob whispered, "and the world has no idea." What made it worse was the silence. The people around Elvis pretending everything was normal, pretending he was fine, pretending the show had to go on. Some were scared, some were in denial. Some had convinced themselves that Elvis would push through, like he always did. But Bob knew this wasn't like the other times. This was the last storm. He said Elvis's eyes looked different during those shows. Not empty, not sad, but distant, like someone who knew time was running out and was quietly preparing for something he couldn't avoid. Elvis stopped talking about the future. He stopped joking about new music. He stopped making plans. Instead, he talked about rest, about peace, about wanting silence after a lifetime of noise. And then Bob revealed something he hadn't shared publicly before. On one of the final nights of the tour, Elvis told someone close to him that he had a dream. One where he wasn't famous, wasn't pressured, wasn't sick. A dream where he got to start over, rebuild his health, reconnect with God, and finally live as the man he once was. But he said he didn't know if he'd make it long enough to see that dream. Those words stayed with Bob. He said they sounded less like a dream and more like a farewell. And then came the most haunting revelation. Elvis left behind one final warning, but this one wasn't written, and it wasn't meant to be opened later. It was spoken in a whisper, so soft that Bob said the room almost swallowed it whole. It happened backstage not long before Elvis walked out for one of his final performances. Elvis leaned close and said something that made Bob freeze. Something that didn't sound like fear or weakness or confusion. It sounded like acceptance. If anything happens to me out there, just tell them I tried. Those words weren't dramatic. They weren't theatrical. They were the truth of a man fighting a battle the world couldn't see. Bob said those 7 words felt like a message, a warning, and a goodbye, all wrapped into one. And it was in that moment Bob realized Elvis wasn't leaving hints by accident. He was preparing for an ending he knew was closer than anyone wanted to believe. Bob Joyce said that of all the things he kept inside, one moment stayed with him more than anything else. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It wasn't something the world could ever see on video or read in a biography. It was a single sentence spoken softly, but with the full weight of a man carrying an empire on failing shoulders. It happened just minutes before one of Elvis Presley's final performances. Elvis stood there, quiet, breathing slow, gathering strength the same way a soldier prepares for a battle he knows he might not survive. Bob said Elvis wasn't shaking from fear. He wasn't trembling from nerves. He was trembling because his body was worn out, pushed to its limits, begging him to stop. But Elvis wouldn't stop. Not yet. Not until he delivered what his fans came to see. Bob said Elvis leaned toward him, not like a superstar giving instructions, but like a friend who needed someone to hear what he couldn't say to anyone else. A friend who needed to let something out before the weight crushed him completely. And then Elvis whispered the words that pierced Bob's heart forever. "If I don't come back, tell them I tried." Bob said he didn't understand at first. It didn't feel like a goodbye. It felt like a confession, like Elvis was explaining himself before the world made its own conclusions, as if he knew how people judged him, as if he feared his struggle would be mistaken for weakness, not for the unbelievable strength it took just to step onto that stage. Because Elvis wasn't fighting laziness, ego, or the desire to please an industry that drained him. He was fighting to stay alive, fighting to keep the myth afloat while the man underneath was slipping away. And still, he wanted people to know he tried. Those 7 words turned Bob's entire understanding of Elvis's final days upside down. Elvis wasn't drifting. He wasn't giving up. He wasn't losing interest. He was pushing harder than he ever had in his life. Every show on that tour was a fight between his willpower and his failing body. Every step on that stage felt like walking on shaking ground. Every breath came with the silent hope that it wouldn't be the one that stopped. Yet Elvis kept showing up, not because he had to, not because he was forced, but because he loved his audience so deeply that he would rather collapse in the attempt than leave them disappointed. Bob said that after Elvis spoke those words, something inside him broke. He knew the man in front of him wasn't asking for sympathy. He wasn't looking for a way out. He was simply telling the truth no one else allowed themselves to hear. He knew, Bob whispered, he knew he was running out of time. And for the first time, Bob stopped trying to convince himself otherwise. But the story didn't end with those words. Bob said there was something else, something that pained him to reveal, even all these years later. Elvis had plans for after the tour, plans that only a few people ever heard, plans to step away from fame, plans to rebuild his health, plans to return to the spiritual roots that shaped him, plans to finally breathe again. Bob said Elvis talked about wanting a small house away from Graceland, away from crowds, away from obligations, a place where he could rest without someone knocking on the door, a place where he could reconnect with God in peace, a place where he could be a man again, not a symbol. He wanted to lose the weight, return to gospel music, fix his body, heal his mind, maybe even disappear for a while, long enough to start over. It wasn't a fantasy, it wasn't a hopeful idea, it was a plan. But Elvis never got the chance. The last tour wasn't supposed to be a farewell. It was supposed to be the turning point, the moment he gave everything he had left so he could finally take a step back and save himself. Bob said that's the part that keeps him awake at night. Because Elvis wasn't lost. He wasn't gone. He wasn't beyond hope. He was just out of time. Bob confessed that sharing these memories wasn't easy. They weren't stories meant for the world. They were pieces of a man he cared about deeply, pieces he protected, guarded, and held close for decades. But he also knew one more thing. Elvis wanted people to understand the truth behind the myth, to see the man who tried, the man who pushed through pain, the man who fought to the last breath, the man whose final words weren't about fame or fear, but about love. And just before Bob finished telling the story, he added one last thing, a reminder, a confession, and a wound that still bleeds when he remembers it. There are parts of this story, he said softly, that I'll never share. Not because they're dark, but because some memories belong only to the heart. If you want more rare stories, hidden truths, and emotional insights from the people who knew Elvis Presley best, subscribe and turn on notifications. Every story we share helps keep Elvis's legacy alive. Not the legend, but the man who loved deeply, tried fiercely, and left too soon.